Modern English spelling has a bit of a reputation. It's bad. Like, native and second language learners alike deride it for some of its more obtuse points, though the seemingly lack of connection between sound and pronunciation appears to be the most common complaint. Which makes sense considering in an alphabet of only 26 characters, only 3 are never found truly silent. But this video isn't about modern English spelling, as the things that make English spelling obtuse aren't actually all that unique among languages. When trying to figure out how to write words, French is notoriously bad, and Tibetan and Thai have gained an even worse reputation, due in part to some fellow linguistic YouTubers. When trying to sound out how words are read, logographies easily take the cake, however, especially in the context of Japanese, though that's a topic for another video. I could talk about how modern English developed to be what it is, but I'll also save that for a video for a later date. No, today isn't about modern English spelling and its irregularities, but actually about Old English and the surprising regularity in which it was written. Now, I know I said that Old English was written with surprising regularity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was regular. Regionalism was quite strong back in the day, with 4 overall scribal traditions based on the 4 large dialectal groups of Old English, those being Kentish, Mercian, Northumbrian, and West Saxon. Even within the dialects, variation was abundant. In fact, in Beowulf, we find the word for sense, suthen, spelled 4 different ways. This form suthen itself is a pronunciation variant of sithen, found in the West Midlands according to the OED, which itself could also be spelled 4 different ways. Either way, when looking at old manuscripts, we do find that despite there being 4 major dialects, each period sees one of the dialectal scribal traditions coming out on top. In early Old English, we see Northumbrian as a dominant form, with a greater focus on keeping to the Latin alphabet's original letter set. This makes sense, as a lot of early writing traditions come from the Catholic Celtic traditions in the north, which themselves kept to the Latin consonant set. This also resulted in Old English being written in a form of the insular script, with its slow T's, long R's and S's, and the distinct G. However, most of the documents we have preserved to this day, including Beowulf, were written in the West Saxon traditions, with some added letters to represent Anglo-Saxon sounds. Part of the reason this is the case is that most of our documents come from between 800 and 1000 CE, during which time, due to Alfred the Great continuing his father's conquest of uniting the Anglo-Saxons, West Saxon became the dominant form used across the country, and it's the form that I'm going to explain today, though I'll mention some interesting bits from other variants and periods throughout. First, and I never thought I'd say this about English writing, let us start easy with the vowels. Here, Old English mostly follows Latinate tradition, with these basic monophthongs matching nearly 1-to-1 with our Latin equivalents. The reason Y is used is because in Latin it represented the front U sound in Greek loanwords, though they were often pronounced as E in Latin, hence the name Greek I. However, the original usage was extended to English where the sound existed naturally. Ash was created from a ligature of A and E, which originally represented a diphthong I, but was used by English scribes to describe this in-between sound of A and E. For the Anglian dialects, Ethel was also seen at times to represent the U sound, such as in German. However, in West Saxon, U merged with E, giving us the Old English fort, gos, and bok versus fet, ges, and bech pluralization scheme. More on bok versus bech later. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Old English didn't have 7 monophthongs, but 14, with both a long and short variant for each monophthong. However, again following Latinate tradition, length was not distinguished within writing. Old English also had diphthongs, 2 to 3 of them, with long and short variants bringing us to a total of 6. A and A were both written as EA, while EO and EO were written as EO. There's also U and EU, but those diphthongs merged with EO fairly early on outside of Northumbrian. And that's the vowels, for the most part. We're going to have to put a pin on the diphthongs for a bit, as something else can happen with them when after velars. But for now, let's move on to the fun part, the consonants. First, let's get the consonants with the same values as modern English out of the way. B, D, L, M, N, P, R, T, and X. are all fairly consistent with their modern counterparts, with some variations such as r being in modern times. Moving on to the fricatives, s and th were all voiced intervocalically, meaning they were voiceless at the start and end of words, but voiced between two voiced sounds. Because of this predictability, f and s were used for both the voiceless f and s sounds and the voiced allophones v and z. Meanwhile, th had a similar voicing situation, but an added bonus of two letters that could be used to represent it. The first and more popular was the thorn, derived from the runic character used for the same sound. The second character was eth, derived from modifying the insular d. Both characters were used interchangeably, even within the same text, as can be seen from Suthan in Beowulf earlier. This voicing distinction was cemented in Middle English due to Norman influence and left us with plurals like wives and knives, as well as noun-verb alternations like house versus to house or bath versus to bathe. One thing to note is that in older manuscripts, d could be found representing th, as it was the closest sound available, while b can be found for intervocalic v, as before the fricatives voiced intervocalically, v was an allophone of b due to old Germanic sound shifts from Proto-Indo-European. We can see this by comparing a Northumbrian version of Caedmon's hymn versus the West Saxon version published roughly 200 years later. After the fricatives gained voicing as a distinction, this v was reanalyzed as an allophone of f instead. Finally, the last of the easy characters, win. This character, like thorn, comes from the runic alphabet and represented the w sound in English. And that's all the easy characters out of the way. Now you can say with confidence, when you find some Old English and decide to try to pronounce it, as long as it has any of these characters, you can get it roughly 90% of the time. However, if the text contains either velars or palatals, which, let's be honest, it probably does, your chances of pronouncing the entire thing correctly drops significantly. See, in many languages, velars behave somewhat weirdly, especially when palatalization comes into play. See, in Japanese, g has a habit of being pronounced as ng or r by certain speakers, while in certain dialects of German, it's pronounced as a fricative at the end of a word. Or in Latin, where through a funny chain of coincidences, ended up with 3 different characters for the sound k. Now this isn't a constant, but does seem that if something weird happens phonetically or graphically, it's most likely going to affect the velars. Why am I mentioning this? Because velars were palatalized in the transition to Old English, but the conditioning for said palatalization was lost, and so both velars and palatals were spelled with the same letters. Which means when learning the language, you kind of have to memorize if a certain character represents a velar or a palatal sound. But there are some rules. Let's start easy with H. This was used to represent the voiceless velar fricative at the end of words and the glottal fricative at the start of them. When after front vowels, it was often pronounced as in knicht. Moving on, C was used for both k and ch. When before a stressed a, o, u, or y, it was always hard k. When before stressed I, eo, ie, ea, or io, it was always soft ch. For ash and e, as well as all unstressed vowels, you just had to guess the pronunciation, as the distinction had been lost due to various sound changes. G was used for r and y, in much the same patterning as C, except it could also appear as y before a, o, u, and y as well. SC, on the other hand, was always sh before a stressed vowel, but just like C and G, its pronunciation has to be memorized word by word when before an unstressed vowel. And there. The velars explained. Not so hard, no? Well, this is only for West Saxon speakers. For non-West Saxon speakers, this patterning doesn't hold up. See, palatalization was heavily reliant on a front vowel, and some places may have developed their front vowels differently, which then reflects in the writing. We can see this in words like kald in the Anglian dialects, which eventually become modern English cold. In West Saxon, this would have been child, due to a breaking sound shift found in West Saxon. Even later on, in West Saxon as well as various other dialects, we can see U unrounding to E, meaning the characters Y and I became semi-interchangeable in later manuscripts. And that's it. That's the alphabet most commonly used within Old English. Other letters would also appear as well, such as Z or QU in certain contexts, but they were somewhat unusual. There's also the fact that many texts one sees in books or online will often be updated to a more modern standard for ease of reading. The palatals get marked with a dot, while the long vowels are marked with a macron, and Win gets replaced by modern W to avoid it getting mixed up with Thorn or P, and the insular S and R are replaced by the Roman forms. Wimps. Some other things to keep note of are that when a consonant is doubled, it represents a geminated or long consonant. For the velar palatals, CG was used alongside GG, and instead of being a geminated y or r, it represented a geminated j or g sound. G was also pronounced as g or j when following an n, which would in turn be velarized to ng. Finally, there were also no silent consonants, or at least rarely silent consonants. So night and night weren't homophonous in Old English, with Knecht being pronounced as Knecht, much like modern German Knecht. The letter H could also be found before a number of consonants, representing either a voiceless variant such as in Icelandic, or the sequence h followed by said consonant. And now you can read out Old English with confidence that you are going to get it right, which is better than most people. Though of course to understand it, you'd actually have to learn the language. In which case, I would recommend Oswald de Bera by Colin Gorey. Not only is it informative, the story is also pretty fun. But anyway, until next time, I bid you all adieu.